So once again, we find ourselves with another week of news where the stories are filled with violence and tragedy. And I think that many people are left to wonder, what can we believe about a God when these kinds of things happen? Maybe that's not a question that's been in your mind over the past several days, but I know it's been in others. As we've watched the news from Parkland, Florida, we've been stunned, I think, by what's happened. We've been heartbroken by what's happened. And people have been asking theological questions. What can we believe about God when these kinds of things happen? I've been wrestling with how to answer that question since Wednesday. Wednesday I was searching for words. Thursday I was searching for words. Thursday afternoon I sat down to prepare for today. And I opened up the Bible to the first lesson that we heard in Genesis, the great flood story. It's probably familiar to many of us. I have to say I love this story, and not just because it gives us images that oftentimes adorn our children's nurseries. I love this story because it is one of these powerful tales that has been passed from generations to generations of faithful people who have come before us. Tales that address two very profound questions. The first is the question of what kind of sin we humans are capable of. It's just true. And the second is the question, how is it that God responds to us in the face of that sin, in the wake of that sin? Powerful questions. If you're not familiar with the story, let's be clear that in the run-up to the flood, God has been pleading with humanity time and time again. Straighten up. Get with the program here. This isn't okay. This isn't why I created you. I'm sure God said something like that. You get the point. There have been these give and takes, these exchanges between God and humanity, where God has said, this is not okay. And finally, just, I think, so frustrated, God has decided to wipe the slate clean. In a sense, take that great sort of celestial etch-a-sketch and shake it and say, all right, we're going to start all over again. And that's where the flood comes from. God's saying we're going to start this whole thing all over again. Today's lesson comes at the point in the story where the waters have receded. The flood has come, the flood has passed, and now it's time to start over again. And I imagine Noah, as the door to the ark opens and he sees dry land, I imagine Noah's knees kind of quaking. And not just because he's sort of wobbly from being at sea, but because he's been through this chaos. He's seen this violence. I can imagine that Noah's totally humbled by what has happened. And I also would expect that God's words to Noah would be one of warning. That in a sense, I would expect God's got Noah right where God wants him. And now to make sure that the fear of God stays fixed in Noah's mind, I would expect that God would say, all right, now listen. I did it before and I can do it again. But that's not what God says. That's not what happens. Instead of a booming and ominous voice, we get a voice that I can better describe as tender, as actually grieving. Grieving not just the violence that humanity has committed, but maybe even God is grieving the violence that God has engaged in as well. And so rather than being ominous, God makes a promise to Noah. God enters into this new bond, this covenant with Noah. And it's a powerful promise. Listen again to these words. As for me, God says, I'm establishing my covenant with you and with the descendants after you, with every living creature that is with you. I establish my covenant with you that never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. What an amazing thing. That God's promise is that, look, I will never do this again. I will always be with you. I will always be with you. God knows what humans are capable of. God has seen the worst of it, and God is seemingly saying, so no longer will I respond to your violence with violence. No longer will I wipe you away, but instead I will get down in the mud and I will make this journey of life with you. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Never again will you be away from me and will I be away from you. God makes this covenant for Noah and for all the descendants that have come after Noah, including you and I. Never again will I be out of relationship with you. What a promise from God. What a promise from God. And when you think about how God has lived into that promise, it's not been from some sort of safe and remote distance. When you think about it, God has lived into that promise by walking with us, by taking on flesh of us, by struggling with us, by suffering with us, by dying with us. God has lived into that promise in the most intimate of ways. What a promise. What a bond. What a covenant we have with our God. So what is it that we can believe about God when these kinds of tragedies happen? We can believe that God has long known humanity's capacity for violence. We can believe that God deeply grieves humanity's capacity for violence. We can believe that God has borne the brunt of humanity's capacity for violence. And we can believe that God will never abandon us in the face of violence. That God will be right there with us, weeping with us, grieving with us, wondering about us, calling us, begging us, pleading us to live the kind of life of kindness and grace and love that God has imagined for us. That's what we can believe about God when these kinds of tragedies happen. So here we are, it's the first Sunday of Lent. Some people might look at the events of this week and say, man, why would you do 4 hours, much less 40 days of Lent? You know, why would you care about being in a relationship with the kind of God that would allow this sort of stuff to happen? But I think that what happened in Parkland, Florida, brings into even sharper relief why we need Lent, why we desperately need Lent. As a time to reflect upon who we are and whose we are, as a time to consider how we are with one another and how we are with our God. If what happened in Parkland means anything, it means that we have to be aware of the dangers of alienation, when we are alienated from each other and when we are alienated from our God. And this time of Lent invites us to reflect upon that. It also invites us to imagine the violence that we might commit Now maybe it won't be at the same scope and in the same way as the violence that happened down in Florida, but this is a time, I think, for each of us to do a personal inventory and to consider what kind of violence do I commit? Whether it's physical or whether it's emotional, whether it's grand or whether it's small, because we each have the capacity for it. And this time of Lent invites us to consider that violence and to confess it, as we just did with the great litany, and to make amends. And this time of Lent, I think it also invites us to clarify anew. So what is it that we expect of our God? What is it that we expect of our God? And also to get very clear about what God promises us. Because the reality is, most of the time, when I'm disappointed with God, it's not because God's broken God's promises. It's because my fantasies, my expectations haven't been fulfilled. So this is the time for us to get clear. What do we expect of our God? And to somehow discern the difference between our expectations and God's promises. In reading about the flood story, I came across these words from a professor at McAfee School of Theology. William Lloyd Allen is his name. And about this story that we read today, Allen wrote, God's heart is touched by creation's suffering. The God declaring this covenant today, is not an objective judge meting out a just sentence, but a lover, grieved to the heart at the beloved's violence, yet still seeking reconciliation. God, as a lover, grieved to the heart at the beloved's violence, yet still seeking reconciliation. Sure enough, there are times like this week when God disappoints me. But there are so many times more when God's love for me, for us, is more than anything I can imagine or deserve.